Hey everybody, I'm back with more chess game breakdowns from the amazing report Assessing Game Balance with AlphaZero, exploring different and new rules to chess. It hit the press more than a few days ago at this point from Google's DeepMind, and we've been bringing you all the behind the scenes content we prepared. So it's time for a video on the big subject. I ranked the idea of stalemate equaling a win as my biggest takeaway. It was number one on my top 10 list. Click the video in the notes below if you missed it. In terms of things I think we should consider from this report, maybe instituting, and why not? Let's have some more fun and get more decisive results. Now, obviously, the biggest con to bringing the fact that stalemate would now equal a win is that we'd lose moments like this from idiots on the internet who just simply apparently don't know how to checkmate up a rook and a bishop. So yes, if stalemate equaled a win, we would no longer have moments like that. But as we know, the internet is full of idiots, not sure who that guy was, doing crazy stuff. So if you're into watching people do dumb stuff, there's other things you can go watch on the internet. We don't need checkmate to be a fail anymore. Let everybody have a win with stalemate. And with this video, I'm not going to just tell you why I think that's the case, but show you some positions that would totally change the game, but also some things that would have to totally change in the approach by the world's best chess players if stalemate equaled a win. So without any further ado, let's dive right into why stalemate should be a win. So we start with the basics, right? King and pawn endings. We learned this in the beginning of our chess careers because if we know how to win with just a single extra pawn, that gives us tons of empowerment in the rest of the game. Now we value every piece differently. We care about the tactics. We have this goal in our mind that all I really need is a pawn to win, because if I get it up to the edge of the board, a queen's going to help me checkmate. The problem is that this particular position, with a more active king, just a single more active king from our opponent, takes away all those dreams, all the dreams we have about a single pawn helping us win a game. We get to positions like this, and as I press play, that's not the case, right? That means all of our hard work, the fact that just a single pawn advantage that would allow us to outplay our opponent for one trick in the hopes that we get the endgame that's going to be a win with that pawn, it's not a win. It's just a draw. Because as long as the king is in front of a pawn, those who know their king and pawn opposition theory know that this is a foregone conclusion. Black is going to keep the king in front of the pawn and eventually achieve equality by going straight back and then meeting white with opposition and forcing stalemate. This is a theoretically known problem with the game if you consider it a problem. And as of this moment, I kind of do, right? So again, why did I argue in my breakdown that I think stalemate equaling a win would do even more for human chess than AlphaZero? This is one of the examples. A single pawn is now always a win. Not just this pawn, but a corner pawn is also a win because of stalemate equaling a win, right? That would allow everything about the earlier stages of the game, how we evaluate and assess those critical moments between Magnus Carlsen and Hikaru Nakamura, as having even more weight because of that one Peshka advantage finally being enough. Here's my second example for stalemate equaling a win. Talk about an advantage you wish you could convert. You got king and queen versus king and pawn, but guess what? This is not a win for those who know their theory, because after queen to b3 check, Black can play the move king to a1. This is a well-known defensive trick, right? You have to keep checking the king forever because the moment you touch that pawn, stalemate. Well, guess what? If stalemate equals a win, that's no longer a problem, right? Obviously, those defensive-minded people in the comments would be like, defense isn't a problem. Anyway, obviously, I'm aware of that. But I'm giving you an example of content that could lead to more decisive results. And I would argue, again, at a human level, not just AlphaZero versus AlphaZero, this could be a super exciting development, right? The pressure it would add earlier in games because you don't want to reach this endgame anymore. You no longer get to assess the idea that you would actually be able to hold a draw and rob all the fans of that decisive result they want with the biggest issue we have in the game of kings, that a draw is different than other sports. It goes away. This is now a win for white because that trick doesn't work. And for those who don't know the trap, the moment the king goes in front of the pawn, now your king can come forward, right? You give checks, eventually you force the king back in front. This is very typical. When the king's in front, you do it again, you rinse and repeat, eventually checkmate. It's only the idea of the stalemate that allows this endgame to be a draw. But again, as we see, maybe that's no longer a problem if stalemate equals a win. Next position. This is a funny one because it actually changes the fact, not that Zugzwang needs to exist, because Zugzwang is still a thing in a position where if someone could say pass, it would be a draw. That would be more a draw by agreement. I almost would equate it to draw by repetition or 50 moves. Zugzwang is needed to force someone to move when it's their turn, right, in order for us to be able to win endgames that otherwise would not be winning if the turn didn't have to pass in chess. But this particular position right here is actually normally a draw, because in this check, the defensive technique is based around stalemate. The fact that white can't just wait here because any move is a draw. The king and bishop no longer have squares. That's a very confusing concept for beginners to understand. You have to trap the king in order to checkmate, just like the king is trapped here. The king has no moves when he's checkmated, just like the king has no moves here. Surrounded by enemy pieces often, just like here, right? But no, this is a draw. The other ones are a win. Again, it would be very interesting to see what human beings would have to do differently, right? You couldn't even defend this endgame anymore by relying on the stalemate in the corner. You'd have to defend it with the king and the bishop out in the wild, right? And what would that look like? I don't even know what it would look like. Would this endgame still even be a draw if you weren't able to rely on the stalemate opposite color corner of your particular bishop? I don't know, but it would be a lot of fun to find out, right? My next position, number 4. Talk about an endgame that I've talked about with Grandmaster Robert Hess on every show we ever do, where Grandmasters are very smart and strategic about defending otherwise lost positions by the fact that if you're in an opposite color corner of the enemy bishop, it's a draw. This is a stalemate despite the fact that white is up both bishop and pawn. Well, what if that wasn't the case? What if you could move forward and no longer fear a move like bishop to f4, but rather embrace it and win the game by stalemate, right? Again, it's not even just about this position here. It would affect positions earlier in terms of the level of play we'd have to see, finding new ways to maybe get a repetition in a draw, right? The draw could still exist based on the idea that if you can check forever, or like we say, get down to just king and king, right? But there's no way that it doesn't increase a lot of decisive results and add a lot of fun to how we're evaluating more complicated positions. Case in point, how would we handle endgames like this, where the fact that black played queen h2 check is normally perfectly fine for a draw, right? Because as we already assessed earlier, a pawn in front of the king is an easily drawn king and pawn ending, right? Not if stalemate equals a win. Here, white could play queen e2 check, a crossfire defensive and aggressive move that punches us into the king and pawn ending, where suddenly white is winning with a pawn that normally would not be enough, right? That would mean queen h2 check is not a move that black could afford, having to rely on different diagonal checks and trying to find more creative ways to keep the game alive and keep the fans and viewers happy. Now, one of my last examples that I believe is truly applicable at the very high levels is rook endings. So many rook endings are drawn. Literally, it is the pop culture phrase of whatever Russian grandmaster said it long ago, all rook endings are drawn. I apologize for forgetting my chess quotes for a second, but it's been a long day, and this is like the 5th video I'm recording. But you've heard the saying, all rook endings are drawn. Well, this particular rook ending is a draw, because even though white has the king cut off, because the pawn is far advanced enough, this is known as a frontal attack. The frontal attack is a draw for black because you were able to keep pressure on the pawn, and then finally when your king touched down on e8, the rook can go to e8, and in a king and pawn ending, this is an easy draw, again, because the pawn is too advanced in front of the king. You simply use distant opposition, waiting for the king to come forward. You just wait on the 8th rank, and the moment he does, you grab the opposition, and you're going to hold this draw as long as you know basic king and pawn defensive principles. But what if rook e8 wasn't a possibility? How do we assess this endgame? Suddenly, we're looking at a rook ending that's a theoretically known draw as actually a win for white. Moves like rook c8 are too slow. The frontal attack defense here fails when rook e8 is off the table. Because the longer you sit, eventually, okay, we've already looked at rook a being bad. Eventually, we'll throw it. The white king comes up. You check forever. I have a lot of videos on this endgame over on Chess.com, which would become irrelevant if stalemate was a win, right? I'd have to redo all my videos over there on Chess.com. Another good reason to do this, right? For everyone who hates those videos. The point is, eventually you check that you get up the board and the rook has to go back, i.e. the frontal attack. And the moment he does, now the rook can come up. Next move, you attack the rook, and you start advancing, and the black king is just too far away. The pawn and king outplay the rook. This is known as the frontal attack. Often it can be a defensive measure that works, but in this particular position it wouldn't, because black loses the advantage he has that the king is protecting the idea of breaking the white rook's control, right? This defensive idea goes out the window, and how many other rook-ending defensive ideas might go out the window with it? I have no idea. All I know is stalemate equaling a win would be something that could change the way we think about chess, we talk about chess, we present chess to new beginners and allow them to get the concepts of trapping an enemy king much faster, and even at the high levels might really add entertainment and our different viewpoint to how we look at all kinds of defensive technique, how we really emphasize smaller advantages earlier now that we know we can't just hold with stalemate. I get excited about the possibilities, and I hope you do too. Leave a comment down below. Don't leave me down. Leave a comment. Give me a like. Come on. We've worked hard with this. Give us a share. Tell your friends about me and these Chess.com videos. And again, I can't wait to hear your thoughts about whether I'm totally crazy for ranking stalemate equals a win above classical chess, or whether you might hate yourself a little bit for it, but you might actually agree with me on this one. Either way, we will see you around on Chess.com, and I can't wait to hear your thoughts.